Welcome everyone to today's webinar, AI for Construction Contracts, What You Need to Know. This webinar is sponsored and presented by Superlegal. My name is Tawen, AWCI's Education Program Manager. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our presenter, Christopher Lewis. Chris is the Vice President of Legal Operations for Superlegal. He is a Utah attorney with 25 years experience in real estate and business law, including construction litigation and construction contract negotiation, representing general contractors, specialty contractors, and more. He has engaged in litigation to enforce construction contracts, surety bonds, and secured and unsecured liens. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks, Tao. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm assuming that people are joining because of the AI element of this discussion. So the title of the webinar is AI for Construction Contracts, What You Need to Know. And we've seen a big change in the AI space over the last year and a half. I did a Google search right before this call, and apparently there are over 100,000 AI tools out there available, and that's an estimate because nobody knows. So AI is the tech of the moment. It's gotten a lot of publicity, both good and bad, and we're here to discuss how it applies to construction contracts specifically, and some of the interesting challenges and opportunities that it presents. So we're going to have a question and answer session at the end. I'm going to talk for about 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions, and we'll go to that point. So basically, there are two types of AI tools for contracts. You've got tools for legal professionals, and you've got tools for business professionals. And they're a little bit different. So the legal professionals tend to be very specialized, focused on the law. They tend to require legal expertise to interpret and use, so they're not always intended for a non-legal professional. And the professional is required under ethical rules and professional rules to double check the AI's work. So that's one area. Some of those tools include legal research tools, finding cases or statutes, finding legal analysis, reading treatises on a topic. And those tools have been around for a long time, and now there are just many more of them than there used to be. For business professionals, there are really fewer tools available in the contract space. The tools that are there tend to focus on simpler tasks, flagging risk, asking questions about what is in a contract, things like that. So they're a bit more basic than the tools that the legal professionals use. And by and large, there's no accountability from the tools. What I mean by that is the tools are there to be used, and you get the outcome you get, and you assume the risk of the outcome. So to analogize it to other tools, picture you are trying to install, sheetrock in a building, and you're using an excavator to do the work. Obviously, that is the wrong tool for the job. Or more apt, if you are installing windows and the only thing you have access to is an adjustable wrench, you're not going to have much success installing it. The tool is what the tool is. You use that tool and you take what you get. And so I'm sure we're going to see a lot of development in the types of tools over time. But right now, that's pretty much the landscape of the tools. Talking about AI tools for legal, as I mentioned, they're intended for members of the legal profession, just like AI tools for accountants are generally intended for accountants and so forth. So the artificial intelligence augments, but doesn't replace the legal judgment of the professional. That professional has to look at the output, and we'll talk about a couple of case studies later where attorneys got in trouble, but the tool is not there to say this is what the law says, rely on this definitively. It's to help somebody get in the right direction. For example, I like to go hiking, backpacking, and if I pull out a topo map and a compass, those are great tools for helping me navigate, say, a valley in the high Uintas of Utah. But I need to know what I'm doing. I need to know how to orient the map, how to use the compass, and how to match the tools and how to identify the landscape around me. So I still need to exercise my judgment as somebody who is familiar with topo maps and familiar with looking at elevations and things like that. But it would not be very helpful in the tools of someone who was not interested and not familiar with those tools, right? So if you're to put a 2-year-old out there with a topo map and a compass, they're not going to find their destination any better than if they had neither tool. So really, AI tools for legal are focused on helping attorneys do their job. And there's legal risk if you don't have an attorney involved in using a legal tool, then you're exposing yourself to risk. Just like if you're off in the wilderness and you rely on having this map and the compass and you don't know how to use them properly, the risk is that you get lost and that serious consequences come from that. On the other hand, AI tools for business, they're less common. They tend to address simpler needs. So a lot of these tools include dashboards. They produce summaries. There's some tool that you can navigate to look at, say, metrics or compilations of information or summaries of information, but those tools don't take ownership. What I mean by that is they're not designed for, you don't need to worry about this. We've got it covered. They tend to be typically, here's something that you can use if you know how to use it properly. And you're taking the risk of use, and you can't depend entirely on them blindly. You still have to exercise a degree of oversight and discretion in using them. Some of these tools for contracts for business professionals include attorney verification, which is great because then you have built in a little bit of the ownership issue or the attorney expertise, so that you know that it's been vetted by a professional who's familiar with that area. And there is risk of over-reliance because of the reasons I gave. If you think it is doing more than it is, you risk being disappointed on the one hand or harmed on the other hand. So being familiar with how the tool works, what it purports to do, and how to best use it is important. And we'll talk about that more, what it purports to do, because a lot of the tools in the fine print make it very clear how you're supposed to use them and how you're not supposed to use them. And what a lot of people get in trouble with is just not being familiar with the limitations. I will say that a year and a half ago, especially when ChatGPT was getting a lot of publicity because its tool is amazing, there's a lot of sense that AI was almost magical in its ability to understand a problem and solve it. And it is almost magical in the sense that it produces incredible results when you understand what results it is producing and how to use them and what the limitations are. So let's talk a little bit about the practical element. We have a lot of people who use or experiment with an AI tool and then stop using it. So why has it not gained traction for them? And there are a few reasons. And I've learned these from my personal experience with Superlegal and as somebody who's used ChatGPT and other AI tools as an experiment. So I've seen how these really come into play. One is vague goals or exploration mode. You see a new tool and you think, cool, let's play with this. I think, by the way, that's important. I'll talk about this later, but I think it's really important to explore and experiment with some of these tools. When I was a young boy, my father and brother and I built a couple barns and electric fences and other things, and we were out there. And the way I learned to do the building was experimentation, right? Using, a circular saw and using a hammer and different things that we used back in those days. And so getting familiar by hands-on usage is important. But if you don't really know what you're trying to accomplish, or you don't know what that tool can do for you, the vagueness, the lack of precision in that can lead to never adopting it as a real tool because you maybe have never used it in the way it was intended. Another is misaligned expectations, is expecting it to do something it doesn't do. So if you take out that circular saw and you try to beat nails into a 2x4, into use it as the tool for installing nails, it's going to fail. It's not intended for that. So the most misaligned expectations can cause the deployment of a tool to fail. Another is lack of ownership or feedback. If you let's say that you bought a kit for building a barn, and it has all the pieces there, but there are no instructions. Somebody who's uninitiated might not know how to put it together, might put it together wrong. And the lack of ownership could be an issue. The lack of instruction, the lack of the ability to get feedback, to ask questions, to get answers can be fatal to a project. Another is major workflow disruption. Let's say that you find a fabulous tool that is meeting all of your needs, but you don't know how to integrate it into your current workflow. You don't know when to use it, where to use it, how its output can be given to the right people at the right time. And often deployments just fail because the workflow isn't clear or isn't adjusted appropriately. And finally, the one size fits all tool, that maybe goes back to my excavator analogy. If you've got an excavator and you're trying to build a home with it and do all the things involved in building the home, including roofing, installing ceilings, windows, floors, plumbing, electrical wiring, and including the excavation and building of foundation and framing, it's not going to succeed. It's an excellent tool for its purpose, but it does not solve everything. So a lot of AI tools out there are not designed to solve all problems. ChatGPT is a good example of that. If you've used ChatGPT, it's really cool for identifying a need, for asking questions about general information that's available out there in its data set, and getting answers in a very usable format. It's very user-friendly. The chat format is very friendly. But it is not the tool, perhaps, for, as we'll discover, navigating a legal contract, for understanding how to launch a rocket. It's not designed for certain purposes. That seems obvious, and it is sort of obvious. But we don't always think that way when we're getting into a new tool. Like, we don't always know what the limitations are. And so it's important to understand. So on the opposite side, what are the keys to successful AI tool deployment? How can you use it as a valuable tool? First of all, you want to have a clearly defined problem. What are you trying to address? Are you trying to extract from the contract dates and deadlines? Are you trying to identify high-risk provisions? Are you trying to get a summary of the parties and the responsibilities of the parties? Are you trying to understand what provisions are contained in the contract? Are you trying to negotiate a term in the contract? Knowing what you're trying to do will help direct you to the right tool. And then you'll have a chance of having great satisfaction, because I would say, I'd be so bold as to say, almost every AI tool out there is useful for a particular purpose. So understand what problem you're trying to solve, then you'll be better at identifying the tool, or exploring the tools to see what they can do. And sometimes you don't understand how they can help, so you don't understand what problem they can address. So you look at it from the opposite viewpoint of, what do these tools do, and can that help me in my business? So clear expectations of output is also important. I've seen that in super legal. I just got off a call a few minutes ago where we asked somebody who's looking at our platform, what do you hope to get out of this? And they're hoping to get some things that we do and some things that we don't do. And so we helped them understand what we do and what we don't do. But having those clear expectations helps set people up for success. Another point for success is having one owner. If you internally have multiple people that are interested in the outcome, that's fine. But if they're all owners, I have seen how that lack of definition of definitive ownership creates an implementation problem. But having one person in charge, one person who's responsible for communicating, for understanding the tool intimately, for managing it, for helping other people get to understand it, is ideal. There should be somebody who can interact with the tool's owner, the company that produces that tool, and to the next point, giving ongoing feedback and getting feedback so that the tool can be refined to meet the need. To me, that's critical. You want a tool that's useful. Find a tool. If it's a tech tool, you've got to be able to communicate with the company. And we've all been involved where we're using a bit of software. It could be Microsoft Word, it could be Google, it could be anything. And you're using it, and it's a fabulous tool, but you can't communicate with customer support. You don't know how to take advantage of that, of the communication, of getting feedback, of knowing how to use it. And that can be very frustrating. And then finally, you'll want minimal disruption to your existing workflow. You want it to integrate easily into how you do things. So it's not a very complicated process for adopting the tool. Plug and play, right? You want to be able to just sign up, hit a button, and use it. And different AI tools have different levels of disruption to workflow, and you want something that's very usable in the end. So let's shift gears and talk about ChatGPT. I'm using this as an example because it's one of the most widely used tools. It's wildly popular. I get lots of questions about it, and most people are somewhat familiar with it. So for those who aren't, ChatGPT is a tool where you go to openai.com, you type in a query into an AI bot, basically. You type in, what's a good recipe for hamburgers, and it generates output based on all the information it has in its database. So it's very cool because you can use it for a million things. You can go in and say, hey, I'm 27 years old, I'm 6 feet tall, and I weigh 220 pounds, and I play basketball on the weekends, and I want an exercise routine that will help improve my vertical leap. And you can, it can produce an exercise and even a diet plan. That is cool. It's a very cool tool. If you haven't played with it, I suggest trying it. But when you get into like contract review, first of all, ChatGPT will readily tell you, as it should, that it doesn't provide legal advice. It doesn't always know how things are different in different jurisdictions. Often it will provide results for a general principle of contract law, but not localized in a particular area. And you may not know that going into it. It may not be clear. It also doesn't know anything about you or your business unless you tell it. And typically it won't give specific advice for your business situation. And it can't ensure legal compliance, right? It is not designed for that. That's not what the tool does. It's an excavator driving a nail. It's just not what ChatGPT does. So let's run through a few examples where someone on my team ran the something through ChatGPT, and then by contrast through our platform, so you can see what another AI tool does that's not ChatGPT, but you could do the same experiment with any AI tool. So here's the question that the person on my team used to run this test. Is my liability limited under this contract? Please show me the limitation of liability term. So they ran a contract through ChatGPT, and ChatGPT, I don't know if you can see this well, but the question is asked with the purple by it, and the green response is yes, here is the limitation of liability term from your contract. And then it says the customer is granted a limited, non-exclusive, and revocable license to access and use the service, blah, blah, blah. So it's actually not talking about limitation of liability at all. It's talking about a license right. So it kind of misunderstood the legalese. Our AI is trained in legal terminology. This one is in standard English, and it missed, in this case, it missed the question. By contrast, in our system, we ask the same question. Is my liability limited? Please show me the term. And it says, yes, here's the limitation of liability term from your contract. And it cites it, and it shows what the term for limitation of liability is. So that's an AI targeted to a specific need. It's the right tool for the job versus the one that is not. A second example is understanding the market. Does the limitation of liability term align with the market standard? So when we're talking about market standard, we're talking about what does the market usually do in a situation like this? Is this typical? Is this common? Is this the way it's commonly treated in contracts? And ChatGPT said, you should consult with legal professionals who specialize in the industry, which is fair. I have no criticism of that response. It's an appropriate response. And it says above it, you can't see much, but market standards vary depending on the industry, jurisdiction, and specific circumstances. So then it refers you to a professional. Our tool, as an illustration, says I analyzed the term in line with market standards for a manufacturing company selling products to buyer, and the liability will be capped at the sum of the total fees paid by the customer for the 24 months previous. And so indirect damages are excluded, aligned with market standard, it concludes. So you can kind of see a tool that's more gauged to this type of approach can be more beneficial. I'll give you one final example. When you're looking for contracts, you want a result you can count on. This one was, can I sign this contract as is? And ChatGPT says, I am an AI language model and cannot provide legal advice. However, I can offer some general guidance in a contract, and et cetera, et cetera. It gives a bit of a disclaimer and trying to make sure you're not relying on it for the wrong reasons. And again, I'm going to show you in a minute how some attorneys have, and other people, non-attorneys, do it all the time. Our output was, I found 2 issues that are not aligned with current NDA market standards. So this was an NDA being reviewed, a non-disclosure agreement, and it gives 2 specific terms that are not market standard. And then the follow-up question was, can a legal expert review and fix this? And the result is, sure, here is the revised agreement verified by one of our legal experts. So I talked about earlier about attorney verification and using a tool for contract review, and we have that built in where somebody uploads a contract and we will do a full market standard review or a customized review and have an expert actually looking at it and verifying its accuracy. So again, just seeing, do you use a reciprocating saw, a table saw, a circular saw? What do you use for the job? You need to know what tool you need. And this is just one example. Again, there are many on the market, but that's just how our company works, the one I'm most familiar with. I mentioned we talk about some case studies. So I'm going to talk about 3 warnings about using artificial intelligence, in this case, ChatGPT, inappropriately and how it got somebody in trouble. I just think the warning is important. So this one was in Canada just over a year ago. A lawyer was in a child custody dispute and used ChatGPT for case law that would help her case. And she got a couple cases out and submitted them to the court, those cases. And the counterparty in that case said that they didn't exist. These cases don't exist. We can't find them. They wasted considerable time and expense to figure out that those cases didn't exist. And they asked the court for sanctions against that attorney. And the court ended up feeling like the mistake was genuine and not deliberate, which I agree with. I doubt it was done on purpose. But so they refused sanctions against that attorney, but the attorney is now facing bar discipline from the bar that governs her work. So that's a scary story. The lesson is always verify the output. Have a professional do it if possible. The second story is from Australia. So an Australian lawyer is currently under investigation because of legal complaints because he relied on ChatGPT again to write court filings. So the cases that this attorney relied on in an immigration case, the citations to those cases and the quotations were all bogus. They didn't exist. ChatGPT invented, this is called hallucinating, invented out of whole cloth cases and even quotes from cases that didn't exist. And the court this time complained about wasting considerable amount of time checking the citations and attempting to find the purported authorities. That's the quote. I don't know an update on this attorney's status, but again, I feel some empathy for the attorney who's just trying to use a tool, but just didn't understand the limitations and is now publicly embarrassed, and he's facing bar discipline and possibly worse outcomes. Another story is from New York. So this was in federal court, and a law firm had used ChatGPT to justify getting legal fees reimbursed by the other party to determine what were reasonable fees in that jurisdiction for that type of work. And special education was the area that the attorneys were practicing in. And they actually cited ChatGPT in their submissions to the court. And the court called the approach utterly and unusually unpersuasive. He rejected the ChatGPT's output, but chose not to formally censure the firm, but he cut the requested fees in half. There are other horror stories. I like in all these cases where the judge was being understanding because we're using a new tool, but at some point they're not going to be understanding anymore because the word is out. You have to do better. Attorneys are bound by the obligation to use to supervise the work that's done, whether it's done by a human or not. And in each of these cases, there was a lack of proper supervision that led to embarrassing and expensive problems and outcomes, and could result in disbarment, somebody losing their career. Before we go to Q&A, I just want to kind of review some of the things we talked about. There are a lot of tools out there, as I mentioned, and a lot that are beneficial to your particular space, to what you do. And just be aware, first of all, are you using the AI to solve a legal problem, or is it more on the business side of contracts? And then focus the AI tool you choose based on which tool you really need. So understand your problem. Takeaway number 2, if you want to successfully adopt an AI tool, assign somebody to have ownership, have the stakeholders communicate with that owner, align internally, and then make sure you're choosing a tool where you can give and get feedback and customize to some degree what the output is, so you're not using a blunt tool for a specific purpose. My son has a job in construction. He went out on a job that was far in the middle of nowhere, and they were doing some finish work, and they needed some finish nails. And the guy he was with swung by the store on the way up there and got the wrong size nails. That did not work with the finished gun, did not meet the job requirements. You need to customize. You need a tool that actually meets the demands of the job. And then third, when using an AI tool, make sure someone verifies the output. There is nothing wrong with using a tool and dealing with bad output, as long as you have somebody who can tell you whether it's good or bad. And I would never go into ChatGPT and ask for a blueprint or design plans on the build of my next residence without having an expert look it over and say this is feasible. And with the way that some AI tools hallucinate, to find out that the door that's being installed is a car door, you would laugh at some of the absurd problems that this generates. So make sure you have somebody who is expert enough. For example, if you're using it for contract review, somebody who's the owner of contract review within your business, who understands the terms that the business needs and can verify that they're accurate. If you're dealing with high risk legal terms like indemnification, limitation of liability, warranty, things like that, then you'll want to make sure that you have a legal professional or somebody very familiar with the risks associated with those things to help ensure that the output is good. So those are the takeaways. I appreciate the opportunity to present on this. I'm going to open it up to a Q&A session, and so I hand it back over to lead the Q&A.
All right, thank you, Chris. So you're talking about construction. Are there any customized AI tools being used by contractors for bids preparation, which can perform pricing, compliance check, etc.?
Okay, good question. So, and let me remind anybody who has questions, please submit them through the tool here, and we can put them in queue. Yes, there are some of the ones that you can find out there. There's Toggle.ai, there's Pipe Auto Specs, Down to Bid. There are probably a lot of other tools. There are probably so many tools that you might have trouble finding out which is the right one for your problem, right? So I would recommend getting on, seeing if you can get a demo or be able to use them to see what works best for your business. I'm not terribly familiar with these because that's not my industry, but there are some good tools out there. Next question.
Uh, are there legal or ethical issues for legal professionals using AI?
Yes, no, that's a good question. I know that's not of interest to everybody here, perhaps, but I think it's interesting to know because there are common issues that you might run into. So a legal professional has to have informed consent from a client, has to engage in good communication. These are some of the rules that govern their behavior. They have to communicate quickly and readily. They have to be competent and diligent in what they do. There are all these rules: fairness to the counterparty, truthfulness in statements, candor, uh, confidentiality, safeguarding client information. A legal professional needs to be aware of that, but so do you. If you put something into a tool online like ChatGPT, that information may lose its confidentiality, may get to other people, may be available for somebody else to see and read. So you want to be very careful not putting sensitive, private, personal information into it, or a contract negotiation. You want to be very careful with some of those tools.
What are some ways in which you recommend getting started in AI?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think the first thing I'd recommend is experimenting with the tools out there. Some you can only do a demo, but many you can find at least a video that shows it off. If not, being able to sign up for free and be able to use it. So for like ChatGPT, if you do not have an OpenAI account, I recommend getting one, creating a login, and just using it. And I recommend using it in an area where you're an expert at first. So if you're good at fly fishing, ask it fly fishing questions and then gauge whether it's hallucinating, making up stuff, or giving you good, accurate information, because it can. And I, for example, love linguistics. And I once went into ChatGPT and asked it a question about linguistics, and it cited known linguists and even the names of papers, but the output seemed fishy to me, and I researched it and found out it was all false. And I actually said to ChatGPT, "This sounds bogus to me. Come on." And it replied with an apology. "I'm sorry. Sometimes I hallucinate. I may have made that up." And it actually apologized to me. But getting in and experimenting with the tool is a great way to get started. And then looking at some videos of people who've signed up for a tool that you can't use for free, I would start there.
Wow, that's very fascinating. So someone, as one of our attendees uses, I think the software Document Crunch. Are you familiar with that tool?
A little bit, yeah, yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's knowing what the tool does, and I believe what Document Crunch does really well is to identify, first of all, extracting data from the document, so that you know maybe when a deadline is or what a provision says, flagging perhaps risk, and I think even producing a report on deadlines and a contract summary of sorts. And if that's the tool that you need, then that's great. I don't believe, and I could be wrong, I'm not entirely familiar, I don't believe they do red lines of contracts, and do a full review and markup of the contract with fully negotiated positions and different iterations of that negotiation. If they do, my apologies, but I think it's a good example of understanding your need and what tool you need. But I've heard very good things about what they do produce.
Thank you. So you talk a lot about ChatGPT. Do you put Microsoft Pilot and other AI model that's in the works right now in the same issues for legal matters?
Yeah, so Microsoft Copilot I think is similar in some ways but different in others. They're different applications. So I don't know that I put them in the same category, but there is a potential for risk that still exists with Copilot. So one risk you should be aware of is not oversharing personal information, sensitive information. And I've heard of inadvertent disclosures due to bad data labeling. Like you might not label your data a certain way, so they may overshare share it, anticipating that they can. And there are risks if you don't configure it properly. So any tool that pools data for its benefit has some at least hypothetical risk of losing privacy protection. So I would just be very cautious how you use it.
And then last question here on the same kind of topic. What are your thoughts on turning off the improve the model for everyone setting? Do you still have concerns about ChatGPT's confidentiality?
Okay, that's a great question. So if you turn off the improve the model for everyone setting, what you're basically saying is we don't want ChatGPT to use what we are using it for too broadly, right? We want to limit how the data we're entering is being used, and so that does provide some type of protection, right? So if it increases your privacy because everything you type in there isn't necessarily going to be used, I do still have concerns about the confidentiality of the information you input, because I believe that it has to store what you're typing in, right? It's hard to believe that it's not storing. If it isn't, then that eliminates some of the concern. We also have what I've heard is there's a recent data breach that affected users. And so anytime you're inputting information into a platform, you want to understand how private it is. And when you're pooling information or contributing information to a platform, you want to make sure that you're at least exposing yourself to hypothetical risk, right? That it could get out. It might not stay in that lake, in that reservoir. It might leak into other areas. For example, our company, when you upload information to our system, it is 100% inaccessible to anybody outside the company. It's all internal on our servers, and it's all partitioned for individual users. And so nobody would be able to data mine that, search in it, to see what's in there. So protections like that can help immensely.
Well, thank you, Chris, for this informative webinar. That includes our Q&A session. Thank you to Super Legal for sponsoring this webinar. Thank you, attendees, for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you all.